Hello everybody, I'm Dan and welcome to our Module 6 discussion where we're going to talk about chapters 7 and 8 about interviewing. And I know our professor has given us the option to answer a few of these questions, but I know the expectation is to do all of them. So I'll try to get through these as quick as I can. So here we go, starting with chapter 7. This was about interviewing skills and goals, and assess the importance of asking hypothetical questions to interviewees to gauge their job suitability. Chapter 7 started talking about probing questions, but a hypothetical question is more about the interviewee's reaction to an imaginary, emotional, or value-laden situation. It's something that could happen, or it's something that the interviewer would put out that's a little bit different than the interviewee expects. It's something that may be a little bit more extreme, or maybe something that is challenging. It's meant to be challenging. It's meant for the interviewee to think a little differently. And so it is very creative. You know, when the interviewee responds to it, they have to come up with a creative response to what they would do in that situation. This exercise in coming up with a creative answer helps reveal your reaction let's say in an actual work situation. Let's say in a job interview, you're asked, how would you handle this tech support situation? What are the steps you would take? You may have done that in the past, but in this case, you have to demonstrate what knowledge you have, and if it's some new thing that you don't know how to solve, what would you do to isolate the problem and work around it? This could be very revealing, because it could show that either you actually know your way through this process, it's natural to you, and you don't really hesitate, you don't get confused, or you don't flip out, you don't have a freak out attack. Or it could just be that you don't know what you're talking about. You misrepresented yourself on your resume, and you don't, even though you say you have experience, you don't really know your way around that sort of job. Okay. And sometimes there's a kind of an ethical thing involved there. It could be with that emotional reaction or values, it could be aiming at what kind of reaction you would have in a situation. Does it match with the company's values, the culture, the norms that you would expect to see? All right, so how does such questioning different from probing ones? Where probing ones were listening to someone's story and then giving them little guidance, nudges, encouraging them to go further, talk deeper, extend, the time frame of that story to tell us more about it. You've given us some of this. It sounds like there's a lot more that you could tell us, so please go on. But in a hypothetical situation, it's meant to stimulate your thoughts about the future. It hasn't happened yet. You cannot recollect, about what happened and just fish out the details. You're supposed to be creative and think about what could happen in that situation. So, interestingly, in an informational interview, you're encouraging the interviewee to kind of go on, ramble on, keep talking, be more specific, broaden the scope of what happened in the story. But in a job interview, honestly, I know I would want to keep my cards close to my chest. Like I want to go in prepared to show this certain side of myself that's under control, that's professional, knowledgeable. And I think it'd be a little unnerving if the interviewer started asking a lot of probing questions, go deeper, because you have to start to actually tell the real truth about yourself. And in a job interview, it seems like you want to present some or the best side of yourself, not everything about yourself. Maybe not yet. Okay. So, for example, how do these questions differ in the quality and usefulness of information you might get from an interviewee? So this is going to ask two questions that are basically the same, but they're worded slightly differently. What do you think have been key to your greatest successes and greatest failures? What have you learned from each? All right, and number 2, tell me about your greatest success, then tell me about your greatest failure. Reflecting on each of them, what lessons did you learn from each? The same thing, but worded differently. And I think the idea was the subtle difference. Which one is the informational interview, and the other is a job interview. And so the former one, the first one, was more reflective on lifetime human experience, but the latter is more focused on a specific success and failure and the applicable takeaways. It's focusing on what specific things happen and probably more tailored towards your job experience. Discuss the different types of interviews. Explain what skills are required when preparing for an interview. So in section 7.1, it talks about preparing the interview, and it does mention the types of interviews. There's informational or career search informational. There's a job interview, and then an appraisal, which is feedback from your boss about your job. Okay, all are structured, they're goal-oriented, role-directed, such as the interviewer and the interviewee. And in order to prepare for these types of interviews, they have things that are in common. They require the skills of preparation and setting your goal. What do you want to accomplish? Seeking the right person, interviewee, to approach for this. Arrange appropriately. That's going to be setting the right time, location, schedule, physical settings. Structure, plan out some questions and structure the flow of how you will present those questions, whether it's going to be fewer questions with more probing, deeper, or a broad range. And they talked about the funnel, where you go from broad to specific, or the other way, or tunnel, where you're trying to get through a long list of specific questions. Okay. Discuss the interviewers and the interviewees' roles during the opening, body, and closing portions of an interview. Explain the 3 parts of the interview process. So let's start with the 3 parts. Your basic structure is going to be the opening, where you're more person-focused, you're making it welcoming, setting a friendly tone, making good first impressions, and being upfront about what you're trying to accomplish. Then there's the body, where you have your structure laid out for the questions you're going to ask and how you'll do that. Actively listening, responding back and forth, and then once you've gotten through the time and the information, then you're going to go to the closing, where it's more person-focused and being grateful for their time, respectful, following up with more referrals and maybe some more information you'd like to get later. Okay, so the role for each is, obviously, each has to be an active listener, because it's a real give and take, like the book puts it. It's a dance where you're moving back and forth together in this activity, and sometimes the interviewer is the one posing the questions, the interviewee is listening and trying to understand, and then other times it may be the other way, like the interviewer is listening and the interviewee is telling the story, but also posing appropriate questions back. Also, another role for the interviewer is to control the breadth and depth of the questions, whether you want to go, again, you just want to go deep over a short list of questions or ask a lot of informational questions. The interviewer needs to establish whether it's okay to record, ask permission, and get a device that's not obtrusive, like turn off the ringer and all that stuff. Set it in airplane mode so it's not disruptive if you're using your phone. And then answer the interviewee's questions and keep on your schedule. Don't let it run long. The interviewee has kind of similar roles to fulfill, and that is to be an active listener, give thoughtful, clear responses, and follow up with appropriate questions. Why are basic ethical principles important during the interview process? And this is a good question, because a lot of times interviews can run off the tracks a little bit and either be misrepresented, or it can be coerced, it can be biased in ways that make it so that the interviewee doesn't get a fair shake out of the activity. So section 7.4 talks about ethics in the interviews, and what you need to do is represent yourself truthfully, be respectful, don't waste time, don't manipulate, and do not coerce. Why is it important? And that's hard to answer because it's the sort of thing that we should do, but it doesn't always benefit everyone to be upfront and honest, and it doesn't benefit everyone to be truthful, unmanipulative, uncoercing. I mean, sometimes people have objectives that are not in the other person's objective, and so they're trying to get an advantage, or they're trying to do damage to the other person. So not everyone wants to be upfront when they're asked questions, and not everyone wants to be upfront when they're asking the questions. Sometimes there may be someone who is the target of someone just wants to be malicious to them, so they will start by misrepresenting who they are or what they want to accomplish. They'll say that this is a friendly interview when it's not. Then they will ask questions that have a lot of stuff that's really biased, and so it leads the question in a way that is kind of deceitful. And then they may actually do it in a way that is threatening, coercive, like you're forcing someone to answer, or else they're going to be in trouble. Like, if you don't tell me this stuff, I'm going to tell on you, that sort of thing. And I'd like to tell you a short story about when I was working for a company that did telephone survey. It was political surveys over the telephone during people's dinner times. I just loved it. I didn't. But our job was to take a list of phone numbers and a list of questions and just dial through the list. And of course, when you're calling, you say, we'd like to ask you some questions, political. I don't know if we even said they were political, but just we try to make it so that it was welcoming and made it sound like they would be a big help in this survey, in this research. And of course, people are civic-minded and they want to be helpful, do their duty as citizens. But when we got into the questions, after the demographics, then we'd start to ask things that were increasingly, let's just say it, manipulative. They were framed in a way where we would say, given that candidate B is known to have a record of being, soft on crime, or they have poor decision, like they voted this way on so many things, and given that they are a terrible person, then what do you think about candidate A as a candidate, and are they better than candidate B? Just really questions that are railroading you into a certain response, because you'll feel like an idiot if you say that you like candidate B. You make it sound like you are actually a terrible person yourself. So they're not allowing you to think freely or to ask your opinion. They're not even asking your opinion. They're telling you what your opinion should be. And so, fortunately, I haven't heard from that company in a while, but I hope they're out of business. Okay, how does the person conducting the interview have more power than the person being interviewed? Section 7.4.1 talks about this power differential, where the interviewer can ask questions either through the content of the questions or the method that force or lead in manipulative ways. The interviewer can lie, withhold relevant information, threaten, form questions in a slanted way. So the person asking the questions, the interviewer, has the power to represent who they are, pose the way that the questions will be worded, and even with some bias, they can slant it towards how you should answer. They may be leading you into how you should answer. They will guide you through to answer in a specific way. The interviewee is sometimes not there by choice, and so they do not have the power to not be there. So a lot of times the person asking the questions is the one with the power. And I've heard this saying before, I'm the one asking the questions, and so it's like it's not your job to turn the interview back on me. I'm the one in power right here. Okay. All right, so that does it for Chapter 7. We're going to move ahead to Chapter 8, which is about interviewing goals. You will be conducting career search informational interviews. What kind of information do you believe is important to gather from these interviews? So, informational interviewer, the kind of information you can get is you're preparing for entering a field. So you want to know what kind of activities pros and cons and further networking referrals you can get. And so it's really useful to hold these interviews in advance of actually looking for the job interviews, because you can start to make connections with people. They can get on their radar, and you can maybe find out about jobs before they're posted or get to know other people to talk to. So as far as the relevance of an informational interview, this is not the first time I've heard of this activity. It's actually commonly suggested as a way to get out and expand your network of references, and you can be an effective way to meet people, learning about what they do, and getting contacts to call on in case you start to look for a job. You can just start to reach out and ask what they know about. Section 8.1.1 said, according to research, 25% of those who get hired are known before the job is posted. So you get to know, the employer gets to know you before they actually post the job, and they may reach out to you to offer, not offer the position, but at least tell you about it so you can apply in advance, and you may get some favor. Discuss the role of preparation, your career search informational interviews. What steps should you take to prepare? What kind of questions should you prepare? And how can these interviews be useful to and for you? Section 8.1.1 again was talking about the steps to prepare for an interview, and it begins with identifying a working professional in a position for something that you are interested in and you would like to have that position in the future. You're specifically targeting someone that is going to be relevant. They're going to be the right person to ask about these. And you may consider reaching out to your weak ties, phoning ahead, and scheduling the interview. And so these are useful to you because you're going to reach out to the right people. Again, you're going to gain information about what you should be doing to prepare. You should be asking about other people that are good references for this. This is useful to you because you can get on some people's radars. They'll start to meet you and get to know who you are, get to know your qualities. They may think of you, they may mention you to other people. So you're going to basically be on the playing field in a sense. And another thing is, as you're interviewing, you can pick up details. If you're listening closely and actively, you're going to pick up on details, ways that they answer questions, or specific facts that will help guide you a little bit. You can follow up to ask more, but these are things that you probably would not be able to guess on your own and find out through reading about it. So you may learn some tricks and get referrals in the process. According to our authors, what kinds of task and relational messages might be useful when interviewing and being interviewed? So in section 8.1.2, it is talking about opening and closing interviews with a person focus. That's going to be, in the opening, it's a warm greeting, thanking them for their time, being respectful and open with what you were hoping to accomplish. You were going to talk about whether you can record. Moving ahead to the closing, this is again person focused, where it's not a greeting, it's making more of a personal human connection again. You've just passed this phase of the body where it was task focused, asking a lot of questions, and so now you're going to get back to addressing them as a human being and thanking them for their time, hoping that it was useful for them, and asking if there was anyone else that would be good to talk to, ways to follow up. And so back to the body, this was the task focus section where you have something prepared in advance, the actual content of the questions and the method that you're going to deliver them, the structure, and you're pursuing a goal where you're actually trying to keep them on task to respond to your questions, follow up with more details as you probe, and then providing you information. You've kind of held them to task to follow up, to provide you with help with achieving your goals. All right, so how might they differ in informational and career search and job interviewing? In 8.2, we're talking about how the roles of power are switched. In an informational interviewer, the interviewer is the one asking for something. The interviewer is the supplicant. They're the one who is there by the good humor and grace of this person that they are willing to talk to and give you their wisdom. And in an informational interview, you're more interested in getting a story with a narrative and pursuing either deeper or broader into the questions. But in a job interview, the interviewee is the one who's asking for something. They show up asking, and the interviewer tests to see if the candidate has the best combination or fit. The interviewer, in this case, is the one who is not asking. They may be the one who's granting something. And I think there'll be more task focus in a job interview. It's not a social discussion, and they don't or shouldn't want to know very much about you personally at that point. It should be just the workplace relevant details. So again, in a job interview, I think I mentioned before about how I want to keep the structure kind of down a certain track that I'm expecting. I don't want to divulge too much. I don't want to probe deeper into things. In this case, I think a job interview should be much more about workplace relevant things, and it shouldn't be so much like an informational interview where they want to know my thoughts and feelings and hopes and desires about my childhood. That's not relevant to the job. All right, I'm sorry, I clocked in over 21 minutes. I better end this now. Thanks everybody. Looking forward to the comments. Bye-bye.